Hi everybody, my name is Braylon Rising. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you another true crime unsolved murder mystery. I hope you guys enjoy this video. Please leave any case suggestions in the comments if you do so wish. I want to make a quick disclaimer that I do not mean any harm to the families or people that I am mentioning in this. This is still an ongoing investigation. I don't know if the case is closed or not, but it is still an unsolved case. So without further ado, let's jump into the Sims family murders. Tallahassee in the 1960s was a small town. The population was roughly around 46,000 people. There was not any bad people in the neighborhood. There was a lot of kids, and all the kids would go outside and play with each other. Everybody knew each other. It was a small, trusted town. Kids that grew up in that town were reported saying they would run as far as their feet could take them. Everybody knew each other. It was just a very well trusted, small little town. Robert and Helen Sims came to Tallahassee sometime around the 1960s. They were from a small town named Meridian, Mississippi. It is suspected that Robert and Helen met in Meridian, Mississippi, considering they were both from there. Robert got his PhD from Florida State University around 1961, and he was 42 working at the Department of Communication in the Computer Division. He was an IT tech, so very smart guy. He was a well-known, respected, tech-savvy man, and Helen was 34, so she was quite a bit younger than Robert, and she was born sometime around 1932. She also was from Meridian, like I had mentioned earlier, and at the time when she had moved with Robert to Tallahassee, she got her first job as a church secretary at a local church that everyone in the community went to. So they were already building their life very well once they had moved to Tallahassee. Just want to mention a little thing about Helen. She was actually really good at piano, and it was said that people at her work would leave their break rooms just to go hear her play during their break, which is super cute. Helen was around the age of 17 when her and Robert decided to get married, and instantly they started their own little family. They went on to have 3 daughters, and their daughters were named Virginia, Judy, and Joy. Now, at the time of the Sims family murders, Virginia was 17, Judy was 16, and Joy was 12. All 3 were amazing students. Joy at the time was enrolled in Raw Middle School. She was a very sweet young lady, and people said she had a beautiful smile. Virginia and Judy were at Leon High, and they were National Honor Society, so extremely smart, and they were also known to be very sweet, nice, respectable ladies. The Sims family overall were looked at as very respectable people in their community and also very religious, so there was no reason or anything to suspect about what would go on to happen next. October 26, 1966 was a beautiful day. The wind was blowing and the Seminoles were playing the Mississippi State, so everybody was pretty much there or at the fair that was also taking place the same day. Virginia and Judy actually went to go babysit for the families that were at this game, and Joy, Robert, and Helen all decided to stay home. Robert and Helen left the door unlocked, considering that they knew their daughters would be returning home soon, and I also think it was just a regular thing to keep their door unlocked, considering that it was a nice area. So at around 11:15 that night, Virginia came home to an seemingly empty house. She could not find her family anywhere. She went looking all over the house for them before she made her way to the master bedroom, which uncovered a gruesome scene that nobody was expecting. In the bedroom lied the bodies of her father, Robert, her mother, Helen, and her little sister, Joy. Robert was found lying on the bed with a single gunshot wound to his head, barely clinging to life. Helen was also found lying on the ground next to Joy. She had 2 shots to her head and 1 shot to her leg, but she was also barely clinging to life. She was still alive. Sadly, Joy, the younger sister, was found lying on the ground, still in her nightgown. She had a single gunshot wound to the head and had been stabbed 6 times. Joy, sadly, was found dead on scene. All of the family members had been bound and gagged with various household items. It seemed as if the perpetrator had just gone around collecting stuff around their house and were using it against them. They were found with items bound against them, such as lingerie, nightgowns, socks, ties, anything that they could find. Upon discovering this horrifying sight, Virginia immediately sprung into action and called the Bebbs Funeral Home, which I looked into, and it seems as if back in the old days, if you knew you needed an ambulance or an emergency service, it was common practice to call the funeral home, since they would be a lot faster than calling 911 or 999 wherever you're from. People have pointed out that it was weird that Virginia did this, but like I said, it was completely normal back in the day, common practice, and a lot of people did this at the time. Sadly, shortly after the ambulance have arrived on scene, Robert was dead, and Helen was being rushed to the hospital, but they found that once she arrived, that the bullet that had went into her head was actually so far lodged in it that they couldn't remove it, and there was nothing they can do. So they put her on a respirator for her breathing and kept a close eye on her, but she ended up passing away shortly after, about 9 days later. She was not brain dead, but just not waking up the whole time. So very sad that the whole family ended up not surviving. The night she died, which was actually Halloween, the officials made the contradicting idea to ban Halloween that night, because they still had an unknown suspect, perpetrator, a killer, walking among them, and they did not want to have the risk of kids going out walking among with this person trick-or-treating. So it was ultimately banned that night, that no trick-or-treating was allowed. And like I said, a lot of people were pissed about this, but it was ultimately, I think, the best decision officials could have made at the time. When investigators searched the Sims family home, they could not find one reason of motive as to why they were killed. Nothing, there was no forced entry, nothing was stolen. There were actually piles of cash around the house that were just left out, and also a very expensive coin collection that was even left behind. So what were the motives behind this? There was no sexual assault that taken place. I had seen multiple newspaper clippings that suggested that Joy's night pants or whatever was wrapped around her ankles when she was found, and suggests that she had been sexually assaulted, but there are no solid files that suggest this, so we don't know for sure if she was sexually assaulted or not. But other than that, police found zero motive. Police then questioned the neighbors to see if they had heard anything. One neighbor said that around 10:45 they thought they heard a scream, but didn't think much of it, considering there was a lot of kids in the house, and they just thought maybe they were playing. Other than this, no further leads were coming up. The first investigator to arrive on scene, and was also put as the lead investigator, was Larry Campbell. There was a lot of controversy about him being the lead investigator, considering that when he got there, he didn't even block it off as a crime scene. He let people come and go as they please, which ultimately in the end contaminated a lot of evidence. It was even said that he would let people come in to make coffee. Neighbors would come in and take souvenirs, whatever they want, such as ashtrays. There are a lot of accounts on this that I'm just not going to get into because we'd be here all day. But point blank period, he unfortunately did not do a good job at securing the scene, which in the end is probably why this case is not solved today. Police were not used to this. They had their hands tied. This has never happened in this community before, and they just didn't have any of the equipment or anything to really solve this case. The technology was better at this time. I mean, Their hands were completely tied, and while people were selling out gun stores, deadbolting their door, police were still on the search for whoever this killer was. But they didn't have anything to go off of. They didn't have a murder weapon, a long suspect list that they could, barely grasp. And even going down that list, police still couldn't find anybody that would want to do this to the family. It was very hard for them to just even wrap their minds around this. I mean, 3 people had died, and 3 well-known, liked people in the community had died. An issue while looking at the suspect list came up, and that was that the number of things that were going on that day in Tallahassee, such as the fair and the huge football game, that was bringing in a lot of unknown strangers into the town, which means half these strangers that were there that day could be long gone, and any of them could be the killers. It could have just been a random act. One strange piece of evidence that came up during this investigation was from a woman that came out a day or 2 after the Sims family murders, who claimed that she had been on a party line, which back then this was a shared service line on a phone where a number of local service users would have used this line where you can't hear a full conversation, but you can hear parts of it. And this was just back in the day, how you call the number and then you had to get transferred over, all that. But she claimed that she heard snippets of a conversation that pertained along the lines of, "Mother, I have done a horrible thing. I've killed 3 persons." She claims she heard this quote over the line, and investigators immediately sprung on it, considering this was their only possible lead. You can conclude he was a young man, but I mean, you can't really make a composite sketch of somebody in your head over from hearing their voice over the phone. And back then, 1966, technology was not as good as it was today, so it was really hard for police even to narrow down on who was this caller. So when telephone companies did try to narrow down on this lead, they could only narrow it down to 1 of 200 people, which obviously is overwhelming. They did know that the call had come from over 5 hours away, though, but as you know, this probably was just a lead that just got shoved in the files and never to be investigated again, because there really wasn't much to investigate off of it in the first place. So that is all the main evidence. Now we have to get into theories, which sucks because theories are just theories. You can't really say that it happened or it didn't. It's just something you have to think about, which is why I kind of hate unsolved cases, because I hate having that mystery. I hate not knowing what happened, but we have to suffer through it, and hopefully one day we can see this case solved. But let's get into the suspects and theories of the Sims family murders. So the first person who was a suspect at the time was named Tommy Folcom, and at the time of the Sims family murders, he was 16. But we're going to jump forward a little bit to his little backstory and how it pertains to him becoming a suspect. So around the time of 1978, Tommy Folcom was 29, living up in Atlanta, and a call came in, and he had actually murdered his girlfriend. And when police, upon arrival, found him, he was found lying on the ground with a jar in his hand that held the liver of his girlfriend, and his girlfriend was found disemboweled all over the floor. She had even her hands cut off. It was a gruesome scene, and when asked why he did this, he said it was to keep Satan off earth, and he had claimed multiple times that he felt like he was being possessed by the devil. Now, when police looked into Tommy's past, they found out that he, at the time of the Sims family murders, only lived 2 blocks away, and he at the time would have been 16. A lot of neighbors in interviews that I saw recounted him, and they actually said that he was a cute boy, that they all had crushes on him, that he was a little bit more shy. But it's just odd that he lived 2 blocks away from the Sims family murders, and obviously this was enough for police to investigate this theory that possibly he could have had done something to do with it, considering the gruesome nature he had done to his girlfriend. Really wasn't that far-fetched that he could have committed that murder if he literally cut up his girlfriend. And they actually found that when searching into this, that the day of the Sims family murders, when they went to, well, not the day of, but, you know, when they went searching door to door for neighbors to see what they had known, when they went to Tommy's house, Tommy was nowhere to be found, and they had went to Tommy's house multiple times to try and question him to see if he knew anything, and every single time he was never there. And police obviously found this pretty suspicious as to why he never wanted to be questioned. Tommy was avoiding the police and obviously was a good suspect at this time. But unfortunately, Tommy had a solid alibi. Not unfortunately, I guess, but just unfortunate to the part that where he can't solve this case. But he was actually seen at a party, and tons of people have recounted that they had seen him at that party, making Tommy not really a reliable suspect. Now, one of the most drawn out theories, one of those suspected, especially from the community in Tallahassee, was implementing a pastor named Cecil Allen. I saw in a lot of other reports his name was Charlie. I don't really know, but we're going to call him Allen for this. But he was the local pastor that actually worked at the same church as Helen at the time. Helen, a few days before she was murdered, had actually quit her job as a secretary at this church, and that's why a lot of people suspected that possibly was his motive, Allen's motive for killing her and the whole family, because I guess he was a ladies' man around the town and people didn't find it that far-fetched that he could have done this. But ultimately, he also had a solid alibi and police ruled him out as a suspect. But because of this extreme gossip around the town, Allen actually ended up moving away. He quit his job and had to start a new life because there was just so much talk about him and speculation, and nobody could just drop that he wasn't the killer. Now, this is another suspect, and this one I kind of leaned more to. He seems like the most applicable, but we don't know for sure. And his name was Robert Howells. Now, the day after the Sims family murders, Robert marries a woman named Peggy. And the reason Peggy had suspected Robert of doing something was a couple days after they had gotten married, they were on their way to their honeymoon. They were going from Tallahassee down to Alligator Point, and sometime during this drive, Robert begins to tell Peggy in graphic detail about how he killed the Sims family. She was traumatized and just let him talk, and he literally named off, like, Robert, what he did to Robert, what he did to Helen, and what he did to Joy, all separately. She just sat there in fear, didn't really know what to do or say. I mean, that would be pretty fucking scary. Now, this all was discovered by a letter written in the 80s by a detective. Well, the letter was written by Peggy, but the letter was found by the detective sometime in the 80s, and this very much incriminated Peggy's now ex-husband, Robert. So immediately when investigators saw this, that possibly they had missed it or something, they again immediately sprung on it. Now, not the best look on Robert, considering he also had a number of domestic issues and also had beat Peggy and threatened to kill her own son. He seemed to have a violent temper and was even said to be worse when he was drunk. So ultimately, police decide that they want to try and get a confession from Robert by miking up Peggy and seeing if she can get a taped confession out of him. But this was all failed when Robert was somehow tipped off by his daughter and did not show up. Now, I don't know how true this is, but while police were trying to come up with a motive for why Robert would have done this, it was claimed that he had been, a couple weeks before, ran into Helen at a grocery store, talked to her for a bit, and then ended up following her home and wrote her a note that said, "I am going to kill you." Again, don't know how true that is, but that was something I found while reading online. Robert claimed his wife was doing this to him because she was mentally ill. I mean, she was seriously, like, trying to get him arrested. It was kind of ridiculous. Police were even kind of growing suspicious as to why she wanted him in jail so bad. But ultimately, after Robert had passed the polygraph test and police found that his gun was a .32 caliber when the Sims family was murdered with a .38, they released him, and he wasn't a suspect no more after this. Ultimately, this case has never been solved, and those were all the theories I've had. There's probably tons more, because I feel like there's tons of things that could have happened, but I would be here all day if I just sat through and named you all the theories and suspects. I mean, it's probably a long, long list. It's sad to see this case go unsolved, and I hope one day it can be, even though it happened 60 years ago. I feel like there should be some kind of technology, like new technology nowadays that can help solve this, but I just feel ultimately in the end they just didn't gather enough evidence or find any fingerprints or DNA, that there's just really nothing they can test or anything to go off of, which is sad. So I don't know how they're ever going to solve this case. I wish I knew how DNA and all that stuff works so I can know, but I know it'll probably take years and years more, and hopefully I live to see this case solved because it's very interesting. That is it for today's case. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please leave any comments down below and also suggest any cases that you would like me to cover. I really enjoy covering more unknown cases. I like to look up cases and then look on YouTube if anybody has covered them, and if they're shorter, I like to cover them because I want to cover more information. So please suggest any cases that haven't really been done, but if you absolutely want me to cover it, I will be more than glad to. Give this video a big thumbs up and also subscribe, and let me know how I'm doing, all that shit. Let me know how you're doing, what you like about my content, what I need to do better. Anything and everything is helpful. Follow all my social links. Everything is down below. Every link where I got all this information, everything you need is down below. So without further ado, I will see you all in